3:14 a.m., the witching hour in the Emirate of Ophir. This is a city that usually never sleeps, a playground built on sand and ambition, where the global elite come to hide their wealth and, occasionally, their secrets. But on the outskirts of the city, where the paved roads turn into gravel and the neon lights give way to the darkness of the Project Meridian construction zone, there is only silence. It is a silence that shouldn't exist, because hanging precariously over the edge of Foundation Pit 4, teetering on a precipice of loose gravel and sand, is a machine designed to roar. A silver Vantage Obsidian SUV. Retail price, $280,000. A vehicle engineered for power, for dominance, for making a statement. Tonight, however, it is making no sound at all. Ravi Kumar, a private security contractor assigned to the stalled construction site, was the first to see the glint of silver under his flashlight beam. In his statement later given to the Ophir Central Police, Ravi described the scene as frozen. The car wasn't smashed. It wasn't smoking. The front bumper was hovering exactly 3 inches over a 50-foot drop into darkness. Ravi approached the vehicle cautiously. In Ophir, abandoned luxury cars are not uncommon. Deaths often lead to midnight flights to the airport, leaving Porsches and Ferraris gathering dust in airport parking lots. But as he wiped the condensation from the driver's side window, he realized this wasn't an abandonment. Inside, slumped over the hand-stitched leather steering wheel, was a man. He was dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, the top button of his dress shirt undone. To the untrained eye, he looked like a man exhausted after a long night of corporate negotiations. But Ravi noticed something that would later baffle the forensic crash investigators. There were no skid marks on the gravel, no torn earth where the tires should have locked up in a panic, no shattered glass. The car hadn't crashed. It had been guided. The man inside was Kenneth Tan, 48 years old, the chief financial officer of Stratosphere Fintech, a Singaporean national who moved millions of dollars with a single keystroke, a man who had everything: power, a beautiful family, and a reputation as immaculate as his suit. But Kenneth Tan was dead, and as the paramedics would soon discover, his death had nothing to do with the car, and everything to do with the chemistry coursing through his veins. This wasn't a tragic accident. This was the final move in a domestic chess game that had turned lethal. What you are about to witness is a story of biological warfare waged within a marriage. A story about the platinum visa, the ultimate status symbol that promised freedom, but instead revealed a death sentence. To understand why Kenneth Tan ended up dead in a construction pit, we have to understand the woman who put him there. Or rather, the woman the state prosecutors would allege put him there. Meet Carmen. Born in 1989 in a quiet, agricultural province in the Philippines, Carmen's life was a study in resilience. She was the eldest of 4, the breadwinner, the one carrying the weight of her family's future on her shoulders. Friends and family described her as unbreakable. She put herself through hospitality school by working nights, driven by a singular goal: to see the world. In 2011, she achieved it. She was hired by Pan Asian Airways, one of the most prestigious carriers in the region. For Carmen, the uniform wasn't just clothing, it was armor. It was her ticket out of poverty. She spent 3 years in the air, serving champagne to the occupants of first class, smiling through turbulence, always the observer of a wealth she could touch but never keep. Until Flight PA 402 from Singapore to Ophir City. November 14, 2013. That was the night she met Kenneth. Kenneth Tan was sitting in seat 2A. He was 38 then, a rising star in the Asian financial markets. He was quiet, polite, a stark contrast to the demanding passengers Carmen was used to. He didn't treat her like a servant. He treated her like an audience. He asked her about her life, her dreams, her favorite cities. By the time the plane touched down in Ophir, Kenneth had her number. By the end of the week, they had dinner at the Celestial, a rotating restaurant atop the city's highest tower. For Carmen, it felt like a fairy tale. Here was a man who was stable, wealthy, and seemingly enchanted by her. He was her exit strategy from the exhausting life of a flight attendant. He offered her a different kind of life, one of leisure, security, and status. They married 6 months later in a private ceremony in Singapore. Carmen resigned from the airline. She traded her uniform for designer silk, her cramped crew apartment for a sprawling villa in the Palms, Ophir's most exclusive gated community. To the outside world, Their life was a masterclass in perfection. Kenneth's career at Stratosphere FinTech skyrocketed. He became the CFO, the man who knew where all the bodies were buried in the financial sector. Carmen became the perfect expat wife. She managed the staff, hosted dinner parties for diplomats and bankers, and raised their 2 children, Leo and Sophia. But perfection is often a cage. Behind the high walls of their villa, the dynamic was shifting. Friends would later testify that Kenneth was particular. He controlled the finances with an iron grip. Carmen had credit cards, yes, but they were supplementary cards linked to his accounts. He received alerts for every purchase. He chose the children's schools. He chose their vacation destinations. He even had a say in Carmen's wardrobe. He likes things a certain way. Carmen would tell her sister back in the Philippines during video calls. He's just protective. Protective. That was the word she used. It was the word she clung to. Kenneth didn't let her drive on the highways because they were too dangerous. He didn't want her looking at the bank statements because it would just bore her. He was the shield between her and the harsh realities of the world, or so she thought. Fast forward to the present year. The catalyst for the tragedy wasn't a fight, or an affair she discovered, or a financial collapse. It was a bureaucratic procedure. The Platinum Residency Visa. In the Emirate of Ophir, residency is usually tied to employment. If you lose your job, you have 30 days to leave. It is a precarious existence for expats, no matter how wealthy. But the government had recently introduced the Platinum Visa, a 10-year, renewable residency permit granted to high-net-worth investors and C-suite executives. It was the golden ticket. It meant permanence. It meant that no matter what happened to Kenneth's job, they could stay. The kids could finish school. They would truly belong. Kenneth applied immediately. His salary and assets easily met the threshold. But there was one final hurdle, a mandatory requirement for all applicants and their spouses, the full medical screening. The Zenith Medical Center is less like a hospital and more like a 5-star hotel. Valet parking, marble floors, a concierge who offers you espresso while you wait. It is the premier facility in Ophir Healthcare City. On a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks before the car was found in the pit, Carmen and Kenneth arrived at Zenith. Surveillance footage from the clinic lobby shows the couple walking in at 9 a.m. Kenneth is on his phone, pacing, looking annoyed by the inconvenience. Carmen looks nervous. She hates needles. You can see. Kenneth touched the small of her back, guiding her. It looks affectionate, but knowing what we know now, it looks more like he is steering her. It's just a formality, Kenneth had told her that morning. They check for TB, hepatitis, the usual. We'll be out in an hour. They were separated for the blood draw. Standard protocol. Carmen sat in a leather chair, looked away as the nurse took 3 vials of blood, and then they went for brunch. They didn't think about it again. Why would they? They were healthy. They were wealthy. They were untouchable. 3 days later, Friday, Carmen was at the villa supervising the landscapers when her phone rang. It was the private number of the Zenith Medical Center. Mrs. Tan? The voice was professional, clipped. This is Dr. Farah's office. The doctor needs to see you regarding your visa medical results. Is everything okay? Carmen asked, wiping her hands on a towel. Did Kenneth get a call too? There was a pause on the line. A pause that lasted a second too long. The doctor would like to speak with you personally, Mrs. Tan. Can you come in today? Alone. Alone. That one word planted the first seed of icy dread in Carmen's stomach. In Ophir, medical privacy is taken seriously, but usually couples handled these administrative things together. For them to request her presence specifically without her husband was an anomaly. Carmen called Kenneth's secretary. Is Kenneth in a meeting? Yes, Mrs. Tan. He's in with the auditors. He cannot be disturbed. She didn't leave a message. She grabbed her purse, told the nanny she would be back in 2 hours, and drove herself to Healthcare City. Dr. Farah was a woman in her 50s, stern but kind, a specialist in infectious diseases who had seen the dark underbelly of Ophir's expatriate lifestyle for decades. When Carmen walked in, Dr. Farah didn't sit behind her desk. She sat in the chair next to Carmen. She held a file folder. The Platinum Visa logo was stamped on the front, but there was a red sticker on the corner. Carmen, Dr. Farah started, skipping the pleasantries. We have received the results of your viral screening panel. Carmen nodded, her heart hammering. Is it my iron levels? I've been feeling tired. Dr. Farah shook her head. She opened the file and placed a sheet of paper in front of Carmen. Your test for HIV-1 came back positive. The room went silent, the kind of silence that rings. The air conditioning vent hummed, a low drone that suddenly sounded like a jet engine. Carmen stared at the paper. The words were there, printed in stark black ink. Human immunodeficiency virus detected. That's a mistake, Carmen said. Her voice was small, distant. She felt like she was floating above her own body. That's a mistake. I've been married for 10 years. I have 2 children. I don't do things that would. She couldn't even finish the sentence. The stigma was so immediate, so crushing. In her mind, HIV was something that happened to other people, people who lived reckless lives, not mothers who spent their days organizing charity auctions and school pickups. Dr. Farah placed a hand on Carmen's arm. We ran the test twice, Carmen. We used the Western blot confirmation method. There is no mistake. Carmen pulled her arm away, standing up. The room was spinning. Then it's from the hospital, she stammered, her mind racing for a logical explanation. When I had Sophia, I had a C-section, maybe a transfusion, or the dentist. I went to that dentist in the city last year. Dr. Farah watched her, her expression unreadable. She knew the statistics. She knew that in 90% of cases involving married women in her clinic, the vector was not a dentist, and it was not a transfusion. Carmen, please sit down, Dr. Farah said gently. We need to talk about the next steps. We need to talk about your husband. Kenneth, Carmen whispered. The name felt heavy in her mouth. Oh my God, Kenneth. I have to tell him. He might have it. I might have given it to him. The guilt hit her like a physical blow. She immediately assumed responsibility. She assumed she was the carrier, the patient zero of her family. She thought about her children. Leo, Sophia. Had she kissed them with a cut on her lip? Had she shared a toothbrush by mistake? The panic was irrational, fueled by a lack of knowledge and sheer terror. I've killed them, she sobbed, sinking back into the chair. I've killed my family. Dr. Farah waited for the initial wave of hysteria to pass. She handed Carmen a tissue. Carmen, listen to me. HIV is not a death sentence anymore. It is a manageable condition. With medication, you can live a long, normal life. But we need to test your husband. And we need to test your children, just to be safe. Carmen drove home in a daze. The highway, usually a blur of supercars and skyscrapers, felt alien. She looked at her hands on the steering wheel, the same hands that had packed lunchboxes that morning, and they looked like the hands of a stranger. She felt dirty. She felt contaminated. When she pulled into the driveway of the villa, she sat in the car for 20 minutes, unable to move. How could she walk through that front door? How could she look Kenneth in the eye and tell him that their perfect life was over? That the platinum visa, the symbol of their permanent success, had instead revealed a permanent stain? She didn't know it then, but the woman sitting in that car was dying. The Carmen who believed in fairy tales, the Carmen who believed in the sanctity of her marriage, was taking her final breaths. The woman who would walk into the house was someone else entirely. Someone who was about to learn that the virus in her blood was the least of her problems. When Kenneth arrived home that evening, the house was dark. The staff had been sent away. Carmen was sitting in the formal living room, the medical file on the glass coffee table in front of her. She hadn't turned on the lights. She was waiting. Kenneth walked in, loosening his tie, talking on his phone. Sell the position. I don't care what the analysts say, just dump it. He hung up and flipped the light switch. He saw her. He saw the file. He stopped. Most husbands, upon seeing their wife sitting in the dark with a medical file, would ask, "What's wrong?" They would rush to her side. Kenneth didn't rush. He walked to the bar cart and poured himself a scotch. "Is it done?" he asked, taking a sip. "Did we get the approval?" Carmen looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "I have HIV, she said. The words hung in the air between them, suspended in the recycled air of the air conditioning. Kenneth paused. He didn't drop the glass. He didn't gasp. He looked at her, his face an impassive mask of calculation. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice lacked the frequency of shock. It was the voice of a man managing a crisis, not a man hearing a tragedy. "Dr. Farah confirmed it," Carmen said, her voice rising. "I have it, Kenneth, which means you might have it. We have to get you tested. We have to check the kids." She stood up, walking toward him, needing him to hold her, to tell her it would be okay. But Kenneth took a half step back. It was a subtle movement, but to Carmen, it felt like a slap. "You have it," Kenneth repeated. He looked at her with a sudden, sharp scrutiny. "Who have you been with?" The question stopped Carmen cold. "What?" "You heard me," Kenneth said, his voice hardening. "I work 14 hours a day to pay for this house, for this life. Who have you been seeing while I'm at the office? The tennis instructor? One of the drivers?" Carmen stood there, stunned. She had expected fear. She had expected sorrow. She had not expected accusation. I have never been with anyone but you," she screamed. "You know that. I am here all day with the children." Kenneth shook his head, placing his drink on the coaster. "Well, you didn't get it from the air, Carmen. And you certainly didn't get it from me. I am a clean man. I donate blood. I am checked regularly for insurance." He was lying. It was a smooth, practiced lie, delivered with the confidence of a CFO presenting cooked books to a board of directors. But Carmen didn't know that yet. In that moment, standing in their multi-million-dollar living room, she felt the weight of his gaslighting begin to crush her. He was turning the victimhood around. He was making this her fault. "I want a divorce," Kenneth said calmly. "I will not have my reputation ruined by your indiscretions. And the visa? You can forget about it. In fact, once I report this to the authorities, you'll be lucky if they give you a week to pack." He walked past her, heading toward the stairs. "Sleep in the guest room. I don't want you near me." Carmen collapsed onto the floor as she heard the bedroom door click shut upstairs. She was alone. She was sick, and she was about to be discarded. But as she lay there on the cold marble, sobbing into her hands, she didn't realize that Kenneth had made a fatal error. He had assumed she was weak. He had assumed she was just the provincial girl he had picked up in economy class. He had forgotten that before she was a housewife, before she was a mother, she was a survivor who had carried her entire family on her back. He had forgotten that a cornered animal doesn't just cower, it bites. And Carmen was just beginning to sharpen her teeth. The medical report on the table was not just a diagnosis. It was the first clue in a mystery that would lead her to a burner phone, a hollowed-out book, and eventually, to the edge of a construction pit at 3 a.m. Act 2. The guest room of the Tan Villa was designed for visiting dignitaries and mother-in-laws, a space of impersonal luxury with sheets that had a thread count higher than the average monthly salary in Carmen's home province. But that night, it became a prison cell. Carmen lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the hum of the central air conditioning sounding less like a comfort and more like the ventilation of a secure facility. She didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the word, detected, stamped in red ink. She saw her children's faces. And then she saw the deportation officers. In the Emirate of Ophir, the laws governing infectious diseases are draconian. For expatriates, a positive HIV diagnosis usually triggers an automatic notification to the immigration authorities. The visa is cancelled. The bank accounts are frozen. The individual is given a brief window to settle their affairs before being escorted to the airport. Kenneth knew this. He was counting on it. The psychological violence of that night was quieter than a physical beating, but far more damaging. Carmen was a woman who had built her identity around being the perfect mother and wife. In the span of 4 hours, Kenneth had stripped that away, replacing it with the identity of a diseased pariah. He had weaponized her own biology against her. As the sun rose over the desert, casting long, sharp shadows across the manicured lawn of the villa, Carmen made a decision. She would not pack. Not yet. She checked on the children, watching them sleep with a desperate, aching hunger. Leo was sprawled out with his mouth open, Sophia clutching her stuffed rabbit. They were innocent, and if she left, if she was deported, Kenneth would keep them. He had the money, the lawyers, and the clean medical record, or so he claimed. At 7:30 a.m., Kenneth appeared in the kitchen. He was freshly showered, wearing a navy pinstripe suit, smelling of expensive cologne and espresso. He didn't look like a man whose marriage had just imploded. He looked like a CFO preparing for a board meeting. He poured himself a coffee, glancing at Carmen, who was standing by the counter, still wearing the clothes from the day before. "I have meetings until 6, he said, checking his watch. "I expect you to be rational when I get home. We need to discuss the separation terms." And Carmen, He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. Don't try to access the joint accounts. I've had the bank flag them for suspicious activity, just in case you decide to run. He walked out. The heavy oak door clicked shut. The silence that followed was deafening. Carmen didn't run. She drove, but not to the airport. She drove back to Healthcare City. She needed answers. The logic of Kenneth's accusation was eating away at her, but beneath the panic, a small, hardened kernel of doubt had formed. Kenneth was a man of details. He was a man who calculated risk. If he was so clean, why did he refuse to look her in the eye when he said it? Why was his reaction to a fatal diagnosis in his marriage so bureaucratic? She arrived at the Zenith Medical Center at 9 a.m. She didn't have an appointment, but the receptionist took one look at her face, pale, drawn, eyes red-rimmed, and buzzed her through. Dr. Farah was in between rounds. She brought Carmen into her office immediately. This time, the blinds were drawn. The atmosphere was conspiracy, not consultation. Carmen, Dr. Farah said, her voice low, I was about to call you. We need to talk about the rest of the panel results. Carmen sat down, her hands trembling in her lap. He says he's clean, she whispered. He says I must have cheated. He's going to take the kids, doctor. He's going to have me deported. Dr. Farah's expression tightened. She was bound by patient confidentiality laws that were strict, but in cases of public health and clear endangerment, there were ethical loopholes. And Dr. Farah, who had seen too many women discarded by powerful men in this city, decided to step through one. She opened a second file on her desk. It bore Kenneth's name. Carmen, listen to me very carefully. Dr. Farah began, removing her glasses. We ran Kenneth's sample at the same time as yours. His results are in. Carmen held her breath. Is he negative? No, Dr. Farah said. He is positive for HIV antibodies, just like you. Carmen let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. So I did give it to him, she cried, burying her face in her hands. He was right. I infected him. Stop, Dr. Farah commanded. The authority in her voice snapped Carmen's head up. Look at the data, Carmen. This is not a matter of opinion. It is a matter of biology. She turned the paper around. It was a complex chart of viral loads and CD4 counts. When a person is recently infected, like you, the viral load, the amount of virus in the blood is very high. Your system hasn't learned to fight it yet. Your numbers are through the roof. That indicates an acute infection. Something that happened in the last year or two. She pointed to Kenneth's column. Kenneth tested positive for the antibodies, which means his body has seen the virus. But when we measured his viral load, it was undetectable. Carmen frowned, confused. Undetectable? Does that mean he's cured? There is no cure, Dr. Farah said, leaning forward. Undetectable means the virus is being suppressed. It means the patient is on potent antiretroviral therapy, medication, and not just for a week or a month. To achieve an undetectable viral load, a patient usually has to be on medication for at least 6 months, often longer. It requires strict adherence, daily pills, constant monitoring. The realization hit Carmen slowly, like a rising tide of ice water. He's on medication? Kenneth isn't undetectable because he's lucky, Carmen. He's undetectable because he is being treated. He has known. He has known for a long time. Dr. Farah sat back, letting the gravity of the statement settle. Forensically speaking, the direction of transmission is clear. He didn't get this from you recently. You got this from him. He has been managing his condition, keeping his viral load down to a point where he likely thought he couldn't pass it on. But undetectable usually means untransmittable, only if the adherence is perfect. Clearly, there was a slip, or perhaps, in the years before he was undetectable, the damage was already done. Carmen stared at the wall. The memories of the last few years replayed in her mind with a sickening new context. The vitamins Kenneth took every morning with religious discipline. The way he kept his toiletries bag locked in his travel safe. The separate bathroom he insisted on using because he was a light sleeper. It wasn't fastidiousness. It was containment. He knew. He had known when he kissed her. He had known when they made love. He had known when she gave birth to their children, risking their lives with every drop of blood. He knew, Carmen whispered. The sorrow in her chest evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp rage. He knew, and he let me believe I was crazy. He was going to let me be deported for a disease he gave me. Dr. Farah closed the file. I cannot release his medical records to you officially, but I can tell you that the strain of the virus found in your blood is a genetic match to his. It is indisputable. You are the victim here, Carmen. But in Ophir, being a victim doesn't always mean you win. She looked at Carmen with pity. You need to protect yourself. If he is threatening you with legal action, you need leverage. Biology is on your side, but you need proof that he knew. Carmen left the clinic, but she wasn't the same woman who had entered. The flight attendant Carmen, the housewife Carmen, the mother Carmen, they were all gone. In their place was something colder, something necessary for survival. She drove back to the villa, the gleaming white structure rising from the desert sands like a mausoleum. She parked the car and walked inside. The house was empty. The children were at school. The staff were in their quarters. It was just her and the lies built into the foundation. She went straight to the master bedroom. Kenneth's sanctuary. He was a careful man. A fintech CFO didn't leave paper trails. He didn't leave loose ends. But every man has a weakness. Kenneth's weakness was his arrogance. He believed he was smarter than everyone in the room, especially his wife. He believed she was simple. He believed she wouldn't know where to look. She started with the obvious places. The safe. It was locked, digital keypad. She tried birthdays, anniversaries. Nothing. She moved to the bedside table. Nothing but reading glasses and a sleeping mask. She went to his closet, tearing through the rows of Italian suits, checking pockets. Nothing. She felt a rise of panic. Without proof, physical proof that he was on medication or communicating about his condition, it was just her word against a powerful man in a patriarchal legal system. Dr. Farah's testimony would help, but Kenneth could claim he just started meds recently, or that he didn't know. He could spin it. He was a master of spin. She went into his study. This was his domain. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with biographies of great men, conquerors, titans of industry. A massive mahogany desk that cost more than her father's house. She sat in his chair. She tried to think like him. If he was hiding a secret life, where would he put it? Not on his work laptop. Stratosphere FinTech monitored everything. Not on his personal phone. Carmen had the passcode, even if he rarely let her use it. Her eyes scanned the bookshelves. Kenneth wasn't a reader. He bought books for the aesthetic. He liked the look of leather bindings. But there was one section he actually touched. The strategy section. Sun Tzu, Machiavelli, von Clausewitz. She stood up and walked to the shelf. She pulled down a copy of The Art of War. Felt light. Too light. She opened it. The pages were intact. She put it back. She pulled down the prints. Normal. She pulled down a vintage, leather-bound copy of Wealth of Nations. It was heavy. But when she shook it, something rattled. Carmen opened the book. The center of the pages had been hollowed out with surgical precision, creating a rectangular cavity. Resting inside was a sleek, black smartphone, a burner, and next to it 2 blister packs of pills. Blue tablets. She picked up the pills first. Her hands were shaking, but her vision was crystal clear. She pulled out her own phone and snapped a photo, then zoomed in on the brand name stamped on the foil, Viracontrol. She quickly Googled it. Antiretroviral medication for the suppression of HIV-1. He wasn't just taking vitamins. He was taking these, and he was hiding them in a book about economics. She picked up the burner phone. It was locked. For digit PIN. She tried 0000. Incorrect. She tried 1234. Incorrect. She closed her eyes, thinking. What mattered to Kenneth? Not her birthday. Not the kids. What was the day he became a god in his own eyes? The day Stratosphere FinTech went public. June 15th, 0615. The phone unlocked. Carmen's breath caught in her throat. The interface was sparse. No social media. No games. Just one messaging app, Signal. Encrypted. Secure. She opened it. There were 3 active threads. One was labeled Pharmacy Direct. The messages were purely transactional. Order number 4022 confirmed. Delivery to P.O. Box 89, DIFC. This was how he got the meds without alerting the insurance company or Carmen. The other 2 threads were labeled Chloe and Sarah. Carmen felt a wave of nausea. She clicked on Chloe. The messages went back 2 years. They were graphic. They were intimate. Meet me at the Meridian Hotel. Room 404. I miss you. When are you leaving her? But then the tone changed. 6 months ago. Chloe, you bastard. I tested positive. You gave this to me. Kenneth, keep your voice down. We can handle this. Chloe, I'm going to HR. I'm going to the police. Kenneth, you will do no such thing. Unless you want your family back in London to know exactly what you've been doing to get that promotion. I will ruin you, Chloe. Chloe, I'm scared, Ken. What do I do? Kenneth, check your account. I sent $50,000. It's for medical assistance. And for an NDA. You sign it, you get monthly support. You talk, you get nothing, and I sue you for extortion. Carmen scrolled down. A screenshot of a bank transfer receipt. $50,000. Sent from a Shell account. She backed out and opened Sarah. Similar timeline. Similar seduction. Junior analyst. 24 years old. Infected. Paid off. Kenneth wasn't just a cheater. He was a predator. He was systematically infecting young women in his office, women who depended on him for their careers, and then using his wealth and power to silence them. He was running a personal epidemic out of the executive suite of Stratosphere FinTech. And Carmen? She was just the cover story, the respectable wife at home who made him look stable to the investors. She looked at the timestamps. He was messaging Chloe while Carmen was in labor with Sophia. He was messaging Sarah while they were on their anniversary trip to the Maldives. The grief was gone now. The fear of deportation was gone. In their place was a cold, terrifying clarity. Kenneth was a monster who had poisoned her body and was now planning to discard her like a used wrapper. She heard the front door open, the heavy thud of a briefcase dropping. It was only 2 p.m. He was home early. Carmen, his voice echoed from the foyer. I forgot the files for the merger. Are you here? Carmen stood in the study, the hollowed-out book in one hand, the burner phone in the other. She had the evidence. She had the truth. But she also knew where she was. In Ophir, a wife hacking her husband's private phone was a crime. A wife spying on her husband was a crime. If she walked out there and waved this phone in his face, he wouldn't break down and confess. He would call the police and have her arrested for privacy violation before she could even say HIV. He would bury her. She needed a different plan. She needed to put the phone back. She needed to pretend she knew nothing until she could get the evidence off the device and into a safe place. Carmen, footsteps on the marble, getting closer. She shoved the phone and pills back into the hollow book. She slammed it shut and shoved it onto the shelf just as the handle of the study door turned. Kenneth walked in. He stopped when he saw her. His eyes narrowed. What are you doing in here? Carmen turned, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She forced her face into a mask of tear-stained defeat. She slumped her shoulders. She let the survivor vanish and the broken wife return. I was just looking for a pen, she stammered, her voice trembling. To sign the separation papers. You win, Kenneth. I'll sign whatever you want. Just please, don't take the kids. Kenneth studied her. He looked at the bookshelf behind her. He looked at her trembling hands. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He believed her, because he wanted to believe he had one. Good, he said, walking over to his desk. I'm glad you're finally being sensible. We'll call the lawyers in the morning. Tonight, we celebrate the merger. I want you to make sure the study is clean. I'll be having my scotch in here at 8 o'clock. He grabbed a file from his desk and walked out, leaving Carmen standing in the center of the room. Tonight, 8 p.m., scotch. Carmen looked at the hollowed-out book one last time. She didn't need a lawyer. She didn't need a divorce. She needed to stop him. And as she looked at the bottle of Highland 25 sitting on the crystal tray, a dark, desperate idea began to form. An idea that involved the bottle of prescription sedatives she had seen in his travel bag, the strong stuff he took for insomnia on long-haul flights. She wasn't going to let him destroy another life. She wasn't going to let him deport her. The platinum visa was dead. But Carmen was still alive. And for the first time in 10 years, she was about to take control. The sun sets quickly in the desert. One moment the sky is a bruised purple, the next it is an ink-black void. By 6 p.m., the tan villa was enveloped in this darkness, the landscape lighting casting long, skeletal shadows against the white walls. Inside, the temperature was controlled to a precise 21 degrees Celsius, but Carmen was sweating. She was standing in the guest bathroom, the door locked, running the tap to mask the sound of her preparations. On the marble vanity sat the bottle of Somnara. To understand the weapon Carmen chose, you have to understand the pharmacology of Somnara. It is a fictionalized brand name for a potent sedative hypnotic, a heavy-duty benzodiazepine derivative often prescribed to executives who cross 5 time zones a week. A single 10 mg tablet is enough to knock a grown man out for 8 hours. The lethal dose 50, the amount required to kill 50% of the population, is roughly 2,000 milligrams. But combined with alcohol, the synergy is catastrophic. Alcohol acts as a potentiator, multiplying the depressive effects on the central nervous system. It stops the brain from telling the lungs to breathe. Carmen didn't know the exact toxicology. She wasn't a chemist. She was a desperate mother operating on instinct and adrenaline. She emptied the bottle. 30 pills, 300 milligrams. She placed them into a mortar and pestle she had taken from the kitchen, a heavy granite tool usually used for grinding spices for curry. She began to crush them. The sound was a gritty, rhythmic crunching that seemed deafening in the small tiled room. She ground them until they were a fine, pale blue powder. She knew that pills often contain binding agents that don't dissolve well in cold liquid, so she took a small glass of warm water from the tap and stirred the powder into it, creating a cloudy, bitter slurry. She moved to the study. The scene of the crime was already set. The crystal decanter of Highland 25 single malt sat on the silver tray. Kenneth was a creature of habit. He didn't use ice. He didn't use water. He drank it neat. This was a problem. The cloudy slurry would be visible in the amber liquid. Carmen made a choice. She poured the slurry into the decanter, then swirled it. The 25-year-old scotch, dark and viscous, absorbed the mixture, turning slightly opaque, but in the dim mood lighting of the study, she prayed it would pass for sediment or simply go unnoticed. She wiped the rim of the decanter with her sleeve, checking for fingerprints, her mind racing through episodes of forensic dramas she had watched years ago. The wait was the hardest part. From 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m., Carmen sat in the living room, pretending to read a magazine. She checked on Leo and Sophia 3 times. They were asleep, oblivious to the fact that their mother was sitting downstairs waiting to poison their father. Every creak of the house settling sounded like police sirens. Every passing car headlight sweeping across the window looked like a searchlight. She was terrified, but beneath the terror was a resolve that was calcifying into something diamond-hard. This wasn't murder in her mind. It was an eviction. She was evicting the virus from her life. At 8:15 p.m., the front door opened. Kenneth walked in. He was still on his phone, laughing about a loophole in a contract. He hung up, tossed his keys into the ceramic bowl in the foyer, and walked into the living room. He looked at Carmen. He didn't see a woman on the edge of a breakdown. He saw a problem he had already solved. "You're still up," he said, loosening his tie. "I thought I told you to stay out of my sight until the lawyers arrive in the morning." "I wanted to say, I'm sorry," Carmen said. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. "I was hysterical earlier. I know you're doing what's best for the family." Kenneth stopped. He looked at her, scanning her face for sarcasm. Finding none, his ego relaxed. "Well," he said, a smug smile touching his lips, "I'm glad you've come to your senses. It's better this way. You go back home, start fresh. The kids stay here where they have a future. It's logical." He walked past her into the study. Carmen followed, standing in the doorway, watching him like a hawk watching a field mouse. Kenneth picked up the decanter. He poured a generous measure into his heavy crystal tumbler. He held it up to the light. Carmen stopped breathing. The liquid swirled, dark and thick. Kenneth didn't notice the slight cloudiness. He was too busy admiring his own reflection in the glass. "To the merger," he toasted to the empty room. He took a sip, then a large swallow. He grimaced slightly. "Cork might be going," he muttered, looking at the bottle. "Tastes a bit chalky." "It's the humidity," Carmen said quickly. "The AC was off in there earlier." Kenneth shrugged and finished the glass. He poured another. He sat down in his leather chair, opening his laptop. Carmen waited. 10 minutes, 20 minutes. The drug works fast, but with a full stomach, absorption is delayed. Kenneth typed a few emails, then rubbed his eyes. He yawned, a jaw-cracking stretch. "God, I'm tired," he mumbled, his words starting to slur just a fraction. "Long day." You should rest, Carmen said softly. Yeah. Kenneth's head dipped. He jerked it back up. He looked at Carmen, his eyes suddenly unfocused, pupils dilated. What did you put in the AC? Nothing, Kenneth. He tried to stand up. His legs gave way. He collapsed back into the chair, the heavy leather groaning under his weight. He knocked the glass off the desk. It didn't shatter. It bounced on the Persian rug, spilling the last few drops of amber poison. Kenneth looked at her, realization dawning sluggishly in his mind. He tried to reach for his phone. His hand swatted uselessly at the air, his motor control severed from his intent. You, he wheezed. You stupid. His eyes rolled back. His head lolled onto his chest. Kenneth Tan, the man who controlled millions, was silenced by gravity and chemistry. Carmen didn't move for a full minute. She watched his chest rise, fall, rise, fall. It was shallow, ragged. He wasn't dead, but he was deep in the somnara twilight, a state of profound sedation from which he would not wake up. Now came the physics of the crime. Kenneth weighed 185 pounds. Carmen weighed 110. Dead weight is heavier than living weight. It lacks the subtle shifts of balance that help you carry it. Carmen went to the garage and retrieved a heavy-duty plastic tarp used for covering the patio furniture during sandstorms. She brought it into the study. She had to roll Kenneth out of the chair. He hit the floor with a sickening thud that vibrated through the floorboards. She stifled a scream. She rolled him onto the tarp. She grabbed the corners. She pulled. She was not a strong woman physically, but adrenaline is a powerful fuel. She dragged him through the hallway, her heels digging into the expensive rugs, leaving deep furrows in the pile, forensic clues she wouldn't notice until it was too late. She dragged him into the garage, next to the Vantage obsidian. Loading him was the hardest part. She couldn't lift him. She had to improvise. She used a plank of wood from the gardening supplies as a ramp. She backed the car out slightly, opened the trunk, boot, but realized he wouldn't fit without curling him up, and rigor mortis hadn't set in, so he was floppy, unmanageable. She changed plans. She opened the passenger door. She bear-hugged his torso, heaving him up onto the seat. His head hit the door frame, a laceration that would bleed onto the leather. DNA Evidence 101. She buckled him in. It was a grotesque parody of care. She put sunglasses on his face to hide his closed eyes, a detail she had seen in a movie, which in reality looked absurd and suspicious. She cleaned the study. She wiped the glass. She washed the decanter. She put the mortar and pestle in the dishwasher. A mistake, as the dishwasher wouldn't run a cycle before the police potentially arrived, and residue would remain. She took the burner phone and the pills from the hollow book and put them in her purse. At 2 a.m., she opened the garage door. The neighborhood was silent. She got into the driver's seat of the Vantage. Kenneth was slumped next to her, smelling of scotch and expensive cologne. She put the car in gear and drove. The destination was Project Meridian. It was a failed development on the edge of the city, a place where the desert was reclaiming the concrete. It was 5 miles away. The drive felt like a hallucination. Carmen obeyed every traffic law. She used her turn signals. She stopped at red lights in the empty streets. She was terrified of being pulled over. Imagine the conversation. License and registration. Ma'am? And is your passenger alive? She reached the edge of the pavement. The road turned to gravel. This was the construction zone. No streetlights, just the pale wash of the moon and her high beams cutting through the dust. She navigated toward Foundation Pit 4, a massive excavation intended for a skyscraper that ran out of funding. She stopped the car 30 feet from the edge. She put it in park. She kept the engine running. She got out and walked around to the passenger side. She unbuckled Kenneth. She had to move him to the driver's seat. This was the staging. It had to look like he drove himself off. She pulled him across the center console. It was an undignified, struggling wrestling match with a comatose body. His foot got stuck on the gear shift. She yanked it free, tearing the fabric of his trouser leg. Finally, he was behind the wheel. She adjusted the seat. She placed his hands on the wheel. His head slumped forward onto the horn. Beep. The sound tore through the night like a scream. She frantically pulled his head back, propping it against the headrest. Now the execution. She reached in through the open driver's side window. She put the car in neutral. The ground was slightly sloped toward the pit, but not enough. She would have to push. She walked to the back of the SUV. She placed her hands on the cold silver metal. She pushed. It didn't move. 185 pounds of man plus 2 tons of reinforced steel. She dug her feet into the gravel. She pushed again, gritting her teeth, tears streaming down her face. "Go," she whispered. "Just go." The wheels turned, slowly at first. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The car gained momentum. She let go. She watched it roll. It moved toward the abyss. 10 feet, 5 feet, 2 feet. And then the front wheels went over. The car didn't tumble dramatically. It didn't explode. It simply tipped forward, the undercarriage scraping loudly against the concrete lip, and then it hung there. It got stuck. The chassis bottomed out on the edge of the pit. The back wheels lifted into the air, spinning lazily in the void. The car was teetering, balanced precariously, but it didn't fall. Carmen stood there, horrified. This wasn't the plan. It was supposed to disappear into the darkness. Now it was a monument to her failure. A silver beacon hanging off a cliff. She couldn't go near it. It was too unstable. If she touched it, it might fall and take her with it, or worse, she might slip. She couldn't start the engine again. Kenneth was unconscious in the driver's seat. She checked her watch. 3 a.m. Ravi Kumar, the security guard, made his rounds at 3:15. She saw the flashlight beam in the distance, bobbing like a firefly. She had to run. Carmen turned and sprinted back toward the main road. The gravel tore at her shoes, thin designer flats not meant for a construction site. One slipped off. She stumbled, scraping her knee. She left the shoe. Another mistake. A Cinderella slipper for the forensic team. She kicked off the other one and ran barefoot. The walk back to the villa was 5 miles. 5 miles of cold desert sand and asphalt. Her feet were bleeding by the time she reached the highway. She stayed off the road, walking in the drainage ditch to avoid the traffic cameras that lined the expressway. But the city of Ophir watches everyone. While she avoided the speed cameras, she didn't account for the atmospheric sensors, the private security cameras on the perimeter fences of the other estates, or the satellite tracking on her own phone which she had foolishly kept in her pocket. As she walked, the adrenaline faded, replaced by a crushing, hollow silence. She had done it, but she hadn't done it right. The car hadn't fallen. The skid marks weren't there because she hadn't driven it off at speed. She had pushed it. The physics were wrong. The story wouldn't hold. She reached the villa at 4:45 a.m. She crept inside. She showered, scrubbing her skin until it was raw, trying to wash away the smell of the scotch, the garage, and Kenneth. She bandaged her feet. She put on her pajamas. She got into bed. But she didn't sleep. She lay there waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for the news, waiting for the inevitable knock on the door. She had killed the monster, yes, but in the silence of the Ophir night, she realized she had become something else entirely. She wasn't a survivor anymore. She was a suspect, and the sun was about to rise on a crime scene that was messy, imperfect, and screaming for answers. Dawn in the Emirate of Ophir is not a gradual awakening. It is an exposure. The sun bleaches the color out of the desert, revealing the sharp edges of the landscape that the night tries to soften. At 5:43 a.m., the first rays of light hit the chrome bumper of the silver Vantage Obsidian, still hanging precariously over the edge of Foundation Pit 4. It looked like a surrealist sculpture, a monument to gravity-defying expectation. But the team of first responders gathering at the rim of the excavation weren't there for art. They were there for recovery. Detective Tariq Hamid arrived at the scene at 6:15 a.m. Hamid was a 20-year veteran of the Ophir Central Police, a man who had spent his career cleaning up the messes of the city's elite. He walked with a slight limp, a souvenir from a raid gone wrong in the old quarter, and he drank his coffee black, usually while staring at dead bodies. He stood next to the perimeter tape, watching the heavy lift crane maneuver into position. The wind was whipping up dust devils around the hanging car, and the silence of the night had been replaced by the mechanical whine of hydraulics. "Status?" Hamid asked, not looking at the uniformed officer beside him. "Male victim inside, sir. Unresponsive. Paramedics confirmed 0 vitals via thermal scan. We can't get to the door until we pull it back onto solid ground. It's too unstable." Hamid nodded. He walked toward the edge, his eyes scanning the ground. He wasn't looking at the car. He was looking at the approach. In traffic investigations, the road tells the story before the car does. He was looking for the desperate calligraphy of panic, the black rubber streaks left when a driver slams on the brakes, the yaw marks created when a car swerves violently. There was nothing. The gravel track leading to the pit was undisturbed, save for 2 deep, parallel furrows where the tires had rolled in a straight line. No brakes, Hamid muttered, scribbling in his notebook. He didn't try to stop. Suicide, maybe? The officer suggested. Financial trouble? The market has been volatile. Hamid didn't answer. He walked 50 yards back up the track, following the tire impressions. Then he stopped. He crouched down. Partially buried in a mound of loose sand, glinting in the morning sun, was a shoe. It wasn't a work boot. It wasn't a sneaker. It was a woman's flat, crafted from soft Italian leather, stained with oil and blood. A single Cinderella slipper left in a wasteland of concrete and steel. Hamid picked it up with a gloved hand, bagging it. He looked further down the path and found the second one, 10 yards away. A suicidal man drives off a cliff, Hamid said, standing up. He doesn't bring a woman who loses her shoes. At 7 a.m., the crane finally hauled the Vantage back onto the gravel. The car groaned as the suspension settled. The paramedics moved in immediately, prying open the driver's door. Kenneth Tan fell out. He was stiff, his body locked in the unnatural posture of his final moments. He was dressed in his bespoke suit, but his trousers were torn, and there was a deep laceration on his forehead that had bled profusely onto the leather seat. But it was the smell that hit Hamid first. Even over the scent of gasoline and desert dust, the interior of the car reeked of single malt scotch. It was overwhelming. Drunk driver, the paramedic said, checking for a pulse that hadn't existed for hours. Classic. Passed out at the wheel, rolled off. Hamid leaned in. He looked at Kenneth's hands. They weren't gripping the wheel. They were resting in his lap. In a crash, even a drunk driver usually has a reflex action, hands bracing against the dashboard, gripping the wheel white-knuckled. Kenneth's hands were passive. He hadn't died fighting the fall. He had died sleeping through it. Bag everything, Hamid ordered, and get the medical examiner to fast-track the tox screen. I want to know exactly what is in his blood, down to the molecule. While Kenneth was being zipped into a body bag, 5 miles away in the Palms district, Carmen was sitting at her kitchen island. She was dressed in a pristine white robe, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was drinking herbal tea. She looked like the picture of morning tranquility, but inside, her nervous system was vibrating at a frequency that felt like it would shatter her bones. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in the last 4 hours. She knew the script. At 8:30 a.m., the doorbell rang. Not the delivery chime, the heavy, authoritative pounding of official business. Carmen checked her reflection in the microwave door. She pinched her cheeks to bring color to her pale face. She walked to the door. She opened it. Detective Hamid stood there, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. He held his badge up, but his eyes were already working, cataloging the foyer, the expensive art, and the woman standing before him. He saw the bandage on her left foot, peeking out from under the hem of her robe. Mrs. Tan, Hamid asked, his voice neutral. Yes. Carmen's voice was steady, but her hand gripped the doorframe. Is something wrong? Is it Kenneth? He didn't come home last night. May we come in, ma'am? They sat in the formal living room, the same room where Kenneth had poured his last drink 12 hours earlier. Hamid watched her carefully. He broke the news with professional detachment. We found your husband's vehicle this morning at the Project Meridian site. I'm afraid he has passed away. Carmen didn't have to act. The relief that he was actually dead, that he hadn't woken up in the hospital to name her, crashed into the horror of what she had done. She let out a wail that was raw and animalistic. She collapsed forward, burying her face in her hands. It was a performance rooted in genuine trauma. No, she screamed. No, he was just at the office. He was stressed, but he wouldn't leave us. Hamid let her cry. He waited. He observed. He noticed that while she cried, she didn't ask how he died. She didn't ask if he suffered. She immediately framed it as him leaving, implying suicide or accident. Mrs. Tan, Hamid said softly when her sobbing subsided. We need to ask you a few questions. When was the last time you saw him? Last night, Carmen sniffed, wiping her eyes with a tissue. Around 8 o'clock. He came home early. He was drinking. He never drinks like that. He was so angry about the merger. He said he needed to go for a drive to clear his head. I tried to stop him, but he just drove away. He drove the Vantage? Yes. And he was drinking? Yes, scotch. He finished half the bottle. Hamid nodded. The story fit the scene. A drunk, stressed executive taking a drive and losing control. It was plausible. It was neat. But Hamid hated neatness. Neatness usually meant someone had cleaned up. Did he take anyone with him? Hamid asked. Carmen froze for a fraction of a second. No. Why would he? We found a pair of women's shoes near the crash site, Hamid lied. He didn't say near, he implied in the car. We were wondering if he had a passenger. Shoes? Carmen looked up, her eyes wide. I don't know. Maybe he was seeing someone. We were having problems. It was a pivot, a smart one. She was planting the seed of the affair to explain the shoes. But she didn't know that Hamid had already noted the size of the shoes in the bag in his car, size 37. He looked at the bandage on her foot again. What happened to your foot, Mrs. Tan? Carmen pulled her robe tighter. I dropped a glass this morning. When I realized he wasn't home, I was nervous. I see. Hamid stood up. We'll need you to come down to the station to identify the personal effects. And Mrs. Tan? Do not leave the city. As Hamid walked back to his patrol car, he called the coroner's office. Dr. Aris, tell me you have something. I have a lot of things, Tariq, Dr. Aris replied, his voice tinny over the speakerphone. The alcohol level was 0.18. High, but for a drinker like him, not unconscious levels. But here's the kicker. I found a massive concentration of a benzodiazepine derivative, Somnara. It's a sedative. How much? Enough to kill a horse. Or at least enough to put a man into a coma within 20 minutes. Tariq, there is no way this man drove to that construction site. With the amount of sedative in his blood, he wouldn't have been able to find his car keys, let alone navigate a 5-mile drive. He was dead cargo, Hamid said, staring at the white villa in his rearview mirror. Exactly. And there's something else. He has a laceration on his forehead and bruising on his torso that is consistent with postmortem, or near-mortem, handling. Drag marks, Tariq. Someone put him in that car. Hamid hung up. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with the satisfying weight of a prison cell door closing. The lack of skid marks, the shoes, the drunk driving story, the bandaged foot. He wasn't dealing with a grieving widow. He was dealing with a cleaner. Back at the station, Carmen sat in interrogation room B. It was a stark contrast to the luxury of her life. Concrete walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, a two-way mirror that she knew was hiding eyes. She had been waiting for 2 hours. This was a tactic. Let them stew. Let the silence amplify the guilt. She tried to maintain her composure. She told herself she was doing this for Leo and Sophia. She told herself Kenneth was a monster who deserved it. But as the minutes ticked by, the image of the car hanging over the edge played on a loop in her mind. The physics of her failure. The door opened. Hamid walked in, carrying a clear plastic evidence bag. He placed it on the table. Inside were the bloody, oil-stained flats she had left in the gravel. Size 37, Hamid said, sitting down. Italian leather. Limited edition. We checked the serial number with the boutique in the mall. Kenneth Tan bought these for his wife 3 months ago. Carmen stared at the shoes. They looked small and pathetic in the bag. I want to tell you a story, Carmen, Hamid said, his voice low. It's a story about physics. You see, when a drunk driver goes off a cliff, they usually hit the brakes at the last second. It's instinct. Even a suicidal man hesitates. But Kenneth didn't brake, because Kenneth was already asleep. In fact, according to the toxicology report I just received, Kenneth was likely comatose before he even left your driveway. Carmen didn't speak. Her throat felt like it was filled with sand. You dragged him, Hamid continued, leaning forward. You dragged him from the house to the car. That's hard work. You probably hurt yourself. Maybe scraped your feet running away in the dark. He looked pointedly at her bandaged foot. He was going to take my children, Carmen whispered. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The dam was cracking. Hamid paused. He had heard many confessions, but the motive was always the key. Why, Carmen? Kenneth was rich. He was successful. Why kill him? He was sick, Carmen said, her eyes lifting to meet his, And he made me sick. He gave me HIV, detective. And he was going to have me deported for it. He was going to erase me. Hamid sat back. This he hadn't expected. The file on Kenneth Tan showed a man of perfect health and standing. I have proof, Carmen said, her voice gaining a desperate strength. In my purse, his burner phone, the pills. He infected women in his office. He paid them off. He was a monster. I didn't murder a husband. I protected my family from a plague. Hamid looked at her. He believed her. He could see the truth in the wreckage of her face. But Hamid was a cop in Ophir, and the law was a blunt instrument. Justification didn't erase the crime. It just changed the sentencing. Carmen, he said gently, you need a lawyer. Now. The investigation that followed was swift and brutal. The forensic team swept the villa. They found the drag marks in the Persian rugs, microscopic fibers that matched Kenneth's suit. They found the residue of Somnara in the dishwasher filter, where the mortar and pestle had been hastily cleaned. They found the burner phone in Carmen's purse, with its damning catalog of infidelity and infection. The media called it the platinum murder. The public was torn. Half of Ophir saw a cold-blooded killer who staged a crash to keep her fortune. The other half, once the details of Kenneth's undetectable secret leaked, saw a woman pushed to the absolute brink of sanity. But the turning point of Act 4 wasn't the confession. It was the moment Carmen realized that saving her children from Kenneth meant losing them to the system. As she was handcuffed and led out of the interrogation room, she asked Hamid one question. Will they be tested? Who? My children. Kenneth, he might have. Hamid nodded solemnly. We will make sure they are tested, Carmen. Carmen closed her eyes as the heavy metal door clicked shut behind her. She was in custody. The platinum visa was gone. The villa was a crime scene. But somewhere, in a sterile clinic, her children would finally get the truth that their father had hidden from them. And in the twisted logic of her broken world, that felt like a victory. Act V. The trial of Carmen Tan was not merely a legal proceeding. It was a public autopsy of the expatriate dream. In the Emirate of Ophir, where privacy is a currency more valuable than gold, the platinum murder shattered the unspoken rule that what happens behind the high walls of the villa stays there. For 3 months, the headlines were dominated by the image of the Black Widow of the Palms, a narrative the prosecution cultivated with ruthless efficiency. But inside the High Court, a fortress of glass and limestone in the city's legal district, a different story was being assembled. A story not of greed, but of biological survival. The proceedings began on a scorching Tuesday in July. The courtroom was packed. Journalists from Singapore, London, and New York jostled for space with the local press. Carmen sat in the defendant's dock, behind a pane of bulletproof glass. She wore a modest gray prison uniform, her hair loose, her face devoid of makeup. She looked smaller than the woman in the society pages, stripped of the armor of wealth. The prosecutor, Ahmed Al-Mansour, was a man known for his theatrical precision. In his opening statement, he painted Kenneth Tan as a tragic figure, a brilliant financier, a loving father, a man exhausted by the demands of his empire, struck down by the one person sworn to protect him. Al-Mansour projected photos of the crime scene onto the massive screens. The silver vantage hanging off the cliff, the drag marks on the Persian rugs, the chemical formula of Somnara. This was not a crime of passion, Al-Mansour thundered, pointing a finger at Carmen. Passion is messy. Passion is immediate. This was a crime of chemistry and physics. The defendant crushed 30 pills. She mixed them. She waited. She dragged a comatose man through his own home, loaded him like cargo, and staged a suicide. This requires time. This requires calculation. This is the definition of premeditated murder. The evidence was damning. The prosecution walked the judges through the timeline. 6 p.m. Preparation of the poison. 8:15 p.m. Administration. 2 a.m. Transport. 3 a.m. Staging. They played the traffic camera footage of Carmen walking barefoot on the highway, a ghostly figure fleeing the scene of her failure. They presented the toxicology report, highlighting the lethal concentration of sedatives. To the casual observer, the case was closed. Carmen was a cold-blooded killer. But Carmen's defense attorney, an expatriate specialist named Sarah Jenkins, had a different narrative. Jenkins didn't try to dispute the act. She didn't argue that Carmen hadn't drugged him. She argued why. "The prosecution calls this murder," Jenkins said, her voice calm, cutting through the humidity of the courtroom. "We call it self-defense against a biological weapon." The turning point of the trial came on day 4, when the defense called Dr. Farah to the stand. The doctor, risking her medical license and facing immense pressure from the medical board, took the oath. She sat straight-backed, clutching a file that contained the forensic truth of the Tan marriage. "Dr. Farah," Jenkins asked, "can you explain to the court the term undetectable in the context of HIV? It refers to a viral load so low that standard tests cannot measure it," Dr. Farah explained. "It is achieved through strict adherence to antiretroviral therapy over a long period." "And what was Kenneth Tan's viral load at the time of his death?" "Undetectable. And his wife's? Extremely high, consistent with acute, recent infection." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Jenkins let it settle before delivering the strike. "So, medically speaking, is it possible that Kenneth Tan did not know he was HIV positive?" "It is highly improbable," Dr. Farah stated. "To achieve an undetectable status, one must be on medication for months, often years. One must take the pills daily. One must be monitored." Jenkins walked to the evidence table and picked up an evidence bag containing the blister packs found in the hollowed-out book. Exhibit D, found in the victim's private study. Vera Control. "Dr. Farah, is this a vitamin?" "No. It is a protease inhibitor used to treat HIV." So the victim was taking medication to treat a virus he allegedly didn't know he had, while simultaneously infecting his wife who had no idea she was at risk? That appears to be the case. The narrative in the room shifted. The Black Widow label began to peel away, revealing a woman who had been living in a house of invisible horrors. But the defense wasn't done. They needed to prove that the threat was ongoing, that Carmen wasn't just angry, but trapped. They introduced the burner phone. In Ophir, digital privacy laws are strict, and the prosecution fought hard to suppress the contents of the phone. But the judges, compelled by the gravity of the biological evidence, allowed it. Jenkins plugged the device into the court's display system. The signal messages, previously hidden in the dark web of Kenneth's deceit, were projected in high definition for the world to see. The courtroom went silent as the messages to Chloe and Sarah scrolled by. The transactions, the dates, the callous negotiation of silence for money. "Chloe, I'm scared, Ken. What if I get sick?" "Kenneth, you take the money. You take the pills. You shut up, or you lose everything." Then, Jenkins played a video deposition. It was Chloe, the junior analyst. She was pixelated to protect her identity, her voice distorted, but her testimony was devastating. "He told me it was safe," the digital voice cracked. "He told me he was clean. When I got sick, he laughed. He said I was lucky he was generous enough to pay for my meds. He said if I told anyone, he would make sure I never worked in finance again. He said he owned me." Jenkins paused the video. She turned to the judges. "Kenneth Tan was not just a husband. He was a predator. He systematically infected women, used his wealth to silence them, and when his wife discovered the truth, he threatened to use the state's own laws to destroy her. He threatened to have her deported, separated from her children, and left to die without treatment. Carmen Tan didn't kill for money. She didn't kill for jealousy. She killed to stop a plague." The prosecution tried to counter. They argued that vigilante justice is not justice. They argued that Carmen had other options, the police, the embassy, lawyers. But the argument rang hollow against the reality of Kenneth's power and the terrifying immediacy of the threat he posed. The trial concluded with Carmen taking the stand. It is rare for defendants in capital cases to testify, but Carmen insisted. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She spoke with the flat, haunting clarity of a survivor. "I looked at my children," Carmen told the court, her hands clasped on the railing, "and I knew that if I was deported, Kenneth would raise them. He would teach my son to be like him. He would teach my daughter that she was a commodity, and I knew that eventually, his secrets would destroy them too. I removed the threat. I accept the punishment, but I do not regret saving my children." The verdict was delivered 3 weeks later. In Ophir, there is no jury system. A panel of 3 judges decides the fate of the accused. The Chief Justice read the decision to a courtroom so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. "We find the defendant, Carmen Tan, not guilty of murder in the first degree. A gasp from the gallery. However, the justice continued. We find the defendant guilty of manslaughter. While the court recognizes the extreme emotional duress and the provocative nature of the victim's actions, the law cannot condone the taking of a life as a remedy for domestic grievance. The premeditated nature of the disposal of the body is an aggravating factor. Carmen closed her eyes. She knew what was coming. Carmen Tan is sentenced to 15 years in the Central Women's Prison. She will be eligible for parole in 10. It was a heavy sentence, but it wasn't the death penalty, and it wasn't life. It was a number. It was an end date. The aftermath of the trial was swift. The media moved on to the next scandal. Stratosphere FinTech quietly rebranded, trying to distance itself from its toxic CFO. The villa in the Palms was sold, the proceeds placed in a trust for Leo and Sophia. But the true end of Act V happened away from the cameras, in a sterile room in the pediatric wing of the Zenith Medical Center. Detective Hamid, true to his word, had arranged for the children to be tested. He stood in the hallway as Dr. Farah emerged from the examination room. Carmen's sister, who had flown in from the Philippines to take custody of the children, stood nervously by the door. Well? Hamid asked. Dr. Farah smiled, the first genuine smile Hamid had seen on her face in months. Negative, she said. Both of them. PCR and antibody tests are clear. They are safe. Hamid nodded. He walked to the window and looked out at the skyline of Ophir City, the glass towers shimmering in the heat. It was a city of illusions, where gold visas promised paradise and silver cars hung off cliffs. But down there, in the chaos, 2 children had been pulled from the wreckage. He took out his notebook and flipped to the page labeled, Case 402, Tan. He uncapped his pen and wrote a single word at the bottom of the page. Closed. But for Carmen, sitting in her holding cell awaiting transfer to the central prison, the story wasn't closed. It was just beginning. She sat on the thin mattress holding a small plastic cup. Inside was a single blue pill, her antiretroviral, her lifeline. She swallowed it dry. She looked at the small patch of blue sky visible through the high, barred window. She pictured Leo and Sophia boarding a plane to Manila, far away from the gilded cages of Ophir. She pictured them walking on a beach, holding her sister's hand, safe, healthy, and free. Carmen Tan smiled. It was the smile of someone who had lost everything, yet won the only thing that mattered. She had traded her freedom for their future. And as the heavy steel door slammed shut, locking her in for the next 15 years, she decided it was a fair exchange. 5 years have passed since the gavel fell in the High Court of Ophir. The city has continued its relentless expansion into the desert. New towers have risen, new fortunes have been made, and the Platinum Visa program has been rebranded, its medical screening protocols quietly tightened. But in the Central Women's Prison, located 50 miles from the glittering skyline, time moves differently. It is measured not in quarterly earnings or construction phases, but in the daily dispensing of medication. Carmen Tan is now prisoner 8940. To the guards, she is a model inmate. She works in the prison library, organizing books with the same meticulous care she once used to organize charity galas. To the other women in the wing, many of whom are also expatriates who fell afoul of the draconian debts or domestic laws, she is a quiet matriarch. But Carmen is not just serving time. She is serving a biological sentence. Every morning at 6 a.m., she stands in line at the infirmary window to receive her antiretroviral therapy. The blue pill, the one Kenneth hid in a hollowed-out book. It is the only thing she has left of him, a daily chemical reminder of the marriage that saved her life by destroying it. Detective Tariq Hamid retired 2 years after the Tan case. He now spends his days fishing off the coast of the Indian Ocean, far away from the sterile luxury of Ophir. In a recent interview given for this documentary, Hamid reflected on the anomaly of the case. In 30 years of policing, I never saw a killer like her, Hamid said, looking out at the water. Usually, murder is about taking something. Taking money, taking revenge, taking power. Carmen didn't want to take anything. She wanted to give something back. She wanted to give her children a future that didn't include their father's shadow. When I visit her, and I do visit her once a year, she never asks about the world outside. She only asks about the children. And what of Leo and Sophia? They are no longer the terrified children huddled in a villa while their parents waged biological warfare. They live in a provincial town in the Philippines, raised by Carmen's sister. The trust fund from the sale of the villa ensures they attend good schools, but their life is simple. They walk to school on dirt roads, far from the air-conditioned chauffeured rides of their past. According to reports from the family, they know their father died in a car accident. They know their mother is working abroad to support them, a common enough story in their community that it raises no questions. They do not know about the virus. They do not know about the Samnara. They do not know that their mother sits in a cell so they can walk on a beach. But most importantly, they remain negative. The virus died with Kenneth. The line of infection ended in the construction pit. The legacy of the Platinum murder in Ophir itself is complicated. In the wake of the trial, a quiet panic rippled through the expatriate community. Private clinics reported a 300% increase in requests for full STI panels from married couples. Lawyers saw a surge in postnuptial agreements that included biological disclosure clauses. Kenneth Tan, the man who thought he was untouchable, became a cautionary tale whispered at country clubs, a reminder that in a world of perfect facades, the most dangerous threats are the ones you can't see. Stratosphere FinTech, Kenneth's former empire, has erased him. His name was scrubbed from the company history. His office was gutted and turned into a conference room. In the high-stakes world of finance, failure is tolerated, but scandal is terminal. Kenneth Tan died twice, once in the car, and a second time when the city he worshipped decided he was bad for business. As for Carmen, her release date is set for 2033. She will be 44 years old. She will be deported immediately upon release, put on a plane back to the life she tried to escape 20 years ago. But she is not afraid of that return. In her final letter to the producers of this documentary, written from her cell, Carmen offered a closing thought that haunts the narrative of this tragedy. People ask me if justice was served. They look at the 15 years and say it is too much, or they look at the dead body and say it is too little. But justice is a concept for people who have choices. I didn't have choices. I had a diagnosis. Kenneth thought he was playing a game of chess. He thought he could sacrifice pawns to save the king. He forgot that the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. I am not a murderer in my heart. I am a mother. And if I had to drive that car off the cliff 1,000 times to keep the virus away from my children, I would do it 1,000 times. The desert can have my freedom, can have my youth, but it cannot have my children. The story of the Platinum Visa murders serves as a grim autopsy of the modern expatriate dream. It exposes the fragility of a life built on status, the terror of biological betrayal, and the primal, terrifying lengths a parent will go to when backed into a corner. Kenneth Tan built a fortress of secrets, thinking he was safe behind the walls of wealth. He didn't realize that he had locked himself in with the one person who knew where the keys were hidden. And in the silence of the desert night, if you listen closely near the abandoned Project Meridian site, you can almost hear the echo of a silver car rolling toward the edge, the sound of a golden cage finally breaking open.